Welcome to our last session for today in Strategy and Innovation track. We'll discuss the technology, and our last speaker for today is Kartikeyan Ramamurthy, Director Strategy and Coordination. Hello,
Hi,
welcome.
Elena. How are you? Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The stage is yours. We are
All right. Thanks, Elena. Thanks so much. Just before I start, warm thanks to PMI Bulgaria for the Project Explorer virtual summit, and I wish them all the very best. And thank you to Lyudmil and Yelent as well for having me here. So really. Thank you very much. So the topic that I am going to take up today is emerging technology and the impact of this on the four Ps, largely drawn from maybe the marketing four Ps, but pretty much in our world, it's project, program, portfolio, and PMOs. Before I go ahead and talk about the subject or at hand, a quick introduction just for this session and for ease for everyone. You can call me Karthik. So quick introduction. I'm about 45 years old. I am based in Bangalore, India. And so it's about 3.5 hours ahead of Sofia. So it's about 12:30 at night here. So interesting to do this session from at this time. And my family is, my wife. We have a child and a dog. So that's our family. In terms of my professional experience, it's largely been running PMOs, managing CEO functions, and then of course looking at strategy and operations. That's what I do now. But primarily in my current role, it encompasses the organizational PMO functions like legal, information security, business continuity, procurement, etc. Interestingly, I'm also and relevant. I'm part of the board of directors at PMI Bangalore chapter, which I think is the second largest chapter in Asia Pacific or Asia. And I also am part of PMO Global Alliance, and I'm their India ambassador. So both these volunteering experiences have been extremely humbling for me. A lot of learning from obviously a lot of leaders in PMI, and of course Americo and his board at the PMO Global Alliance. So it's just been a phenomenal learning experience for me personally. And I wouldn't be here speaking if it weren't for my engagements with both these communities. Okay, and a brief sense of where I have been, and basically these are cities and places where I've lived maybe more than 3 or 4 years of my life, and that's just a representation. Yeah, I mean, very quick journey in terms of my professional career. I started with a company called Tata Consultancy Services, which is IT tech firm based out of India. Then I had stints at Oracle and Unisys, largely looking at PMOs. At TCS, it was for one of their largest clients. At Oracle and Unisys, they were more internal PMO organizations. And then in roughly about 10 years back, I moved to Societe Generale, where I did multiple stints running PMO functions, managing CEO offices. That's where I started my foray with corporate innovation. And since the last 3 years at Amadeus Labs, primarily looking at strategy and operations. So that's the quick journey. What am I going to talk about? Primarily, there is obviously a lot of discussion on how technology is disrupting our world today. And in many ways, it's disrupting businesses, it's disrupting the way we do work, it's disrupting the way we are thinking as well. But how exactly is it impacting the world of 4Ps, or to keep it simple, maybe project management, but primarily the project, program, portfolio, and the PMOs? How exactly is it is it impacting? And before I go to the topic, I'm just going to kind of briefly talk about, and this may be really, most of you would be aware of this, so maybe nothing new, but just trying to give you a sense of what is the complexity that we are beginning to face, or have been facing now for a few years, with respect to the complexity in portfolios, and how we are managing that, and how maybe when technology comes, it changes this. Again, I've said technology as an enabler, and that's my view. I still don't see it disrupting anything significantly in the short term in project management, but I do see it as an enabler. Um, so, without further ado, I will jump into the topic, and really talk about, maybe just to give you a brief, quick view on this. So really, if you look at the last few years, or if you look at maybe 10 years back, 15 years back, these pictures kind of give you a view of the kind of projects that were getting run. So if you looked at the top three pictures, on the top, these three, uh, and maybe went 10, 15 years back, you probably had a mix of projects that were driven by regulation, by internal guidelines, by compliance, primarily, and obviously the driver on the project there was to meet the necessary compliance or regulation. Then we had a group of projects which were more, which is represented by this picture, which is more process improvement projects, which looked at bringing efficiency, quality, aspects like that. And then largely there were strategic projects. This were more linked to, let's say, the organizational objectives, the organizational goals, and they were critical to the outcome of the organization, of the strategy, but also in many ways critical to the success of the organization itself. So what's changed? I mean, what has come up in this mix? So if you look at it, again, this is not an all-encompassing list, but it's just to give all of you a sense of what's happening in the project mix. If you look at it, this one clearly talks about incremental innovation. So you start with a tire, some kind of wheel, and you end up with a new kind of wheel, but it's fundamentally still the same. And you're beginning to, we've seen in the last few years a lot of incremental innovation that's happening, and that's a new kind of project that's come up. The last one, of course, is the transforming of the larvae to the butterfly, and this is obviously transformative in nature. It's changing the fundamental nature of what you're doing, changing them. It could be business transformation, projects that deliver business transformation, or any other kind of transformation for that matter. So they are more transformative in nature. They are not just incremental. They are close to being disruptive. So what's happening is that you are beginning to see maybe a project mix in the portfolio changing quite a bit over the last few years. The other thing, of course, we are here. The other thing, of course, is the kind of methodologies that exist. I mean, largely, to a certain point, we were primarily all focused on the waterfall kind of model, the sequential project management, and then with time, that changed into the agile aspects coming in, the lean methodology coming into play, the scaled versions of agility. And then in all of this, we also have industry-specific project management mechanisms. So whether it's the construction industry or the engineering industry, there are specificities in the way project management is done in those sectors, and they obviously have their own customized mechanisms, and not just those two industries, but several that have customized the methodologies. Okay, sorry. The other is, of course, and this is just a survey maybe it's a bit dated, but I'm just trying to make a point here that um, what we're trying to say is that based on based on this survey, uh, we can clearly draw out certain conclusions that the hybrid mechanism or models in portfolios are quite complicated in this and complex in the sense that while this is just giving you a clear 2 by 2 kind of matrix between requirements and the approach taken, it's often very far more complex, and you know this better than probably I do, that often within a portfolio or within a project you have multiple methodologies being taken. There could be a mixture of traditional and hybrid. You could look at doing hybrid for design, and you could do agile for design, and move to a more sequential model for construction. So that's there within a project. When you get a set of projects together, then this is far more complicated. Clearly, this is also not something that's becoming easier. Then, of course, we come to project selection and prioritization, and in within a portfolio. And again, this is there are multiple methodologies and approaches that we use from a project portfolio selection perspective. So the basic ones being cost driven, or you having a scoring matrix, or you are looking at the optimal pricing of if you're running projects around products, then maybe you're looking at optimal pricing. And as we see in this graph, as you move from a more incremental kind of project to a more radical project, the kind of approach changes. You move towards more probabilistic mechanisms, scenario planning, realistic estimates, strategic linkages of projects and their weightage. All these aspects come in. And then, of course, if you go towards the really radical, the unknown kind of areas where you're doing innovation projects, you're primarily looking at information gap, or you're looking at behavioral mechanisms. You're looking at as is. In the information gap case, you're looking at as is versus what it needs to be, and what is the gap between that. So this is also kind of making the whole portfolio mix quite complex. And it's not that we are using a single method or single approach. I mean, obviously, based on the kind of projects, the portfolio selection mechanism can also change. You're also trying to make this hybrid in some ways. So really, if you think about how projects add up, it goes up to portfolio, and how portfolio combine at an organization level, this becomes very difficult upkeep if you don't have the right mechanisms and the right tools and the right organization and the right leadership in place. So all of those obviously impact the way this is happening. And then just as an example, if you think about the way Agile is now coming up, especially scaled versions of it, they are talking about not just how you select projects, but how you finance projects. So the mechanism of how you finance a project is also changing. In the traditional budgeting mechanisms for projects, you are looking at projects being the basic unit of work. People are brought together to do work. You measure the compliance to to inherently uncertain work, right? And so in those mechanisms, supposedly there's higher overhead, there's lower throughput, but again, it's not all not applicable everywhere. It's obviously in certain certain industries, certain projects, this is completely the way that this is done. However, we're talking about lean budgets with areas like Scaled Agile, and they bring in participatory budget. They talk about funding value streams and not projects. And then there are obviously benefits around that with lower overheads, higher throughputs. But also a point that I missed is you're also able to do horizon planning, which is pretty much also the case in traditional budgets. Um, so the point here being, again, there is a mix, and it's not as if the scaled mechanisms have figured out how to work with the traditional budgeting mechanisms. In organizations where both these mechanisms exist, we're still trying to kind of um, engage them effectively. So another factor that seems to be uh, making the portfolio quite complex. Again, this is something we came again the gamut of uh, institutions and communities around project management also add to the complexity. They bring a lot of diversity, and while we talk about while there is complexity in the portfolio, there is a lot of diversity in terms of the mechanisms, the approaches, and therefore there is a benefit that we can pick and choose what we feel is contextual, applicable, meaningful to the project, organization, portfolio, whichever we are looking at. Um, the other thing that impacts this is also the PPM tools that are used. Again, I'm not evangelizing one versus the other here, but just what's been going on with them, just to give you a perspective of, from the tooling aspect in portfolio, what seems to be changing. So I've put up a few years of the Gartner Magic Quadrant on the PPM. It's been evolving, and as you will see in 2021, now we have a new strategic portfolio management Magic Quadrant as well. But if you looked at, say, 2005, 2010, you largely looked at, especially in the leaders side, you looked at large organizations that had specific products. And then you looked largely, you can look just by looking at these two pictures that there seems to be a lot of action in the niche players between, say, 2005 and 10. And I went a few years back just for us to see how this has evolved. Okay, it's missing one thing. Yeah, sorry. So primarily what was probably happening, let's say, between 2000 and 2015 in these tools, to put it very simplistically, there's a lot of consolidation in within these companies, the PPM tool providers. Um, the thing that was evolving was portfolio definitions, how our portfolio is defined and how is work linked to that, integrated reporting and dashboarding, workflow capabilities, and, as I was mentioning earlier, gradually addressing the different aspects of portfolio planning, from from aspects like planning portfolios, demand management, the actual work execution, and then of course the workflow and collaboration capabilities were also kind of getting enhanced in this period. Uh, uh, what's happened maybe in the recent last 4 years, very quickly for us to see, we now see far fewer players, a lot of consolidation happening in this front. Of course, we will also see some new players, or rather existing players, getting into new areas like agile project management. Very quickly till 2019. So if you really quickly look at this, there's not too much. It looks as if there's not too much happening, right? But are we saying the PPM tools have kind of completely stabilized? We're not doing anything. Nothing is happening. But one of the things, as I was saying, is which is not the case. But one of the things, as I was saying earlier, is that there is a lot of rapid integration of agile capability in its evolution, even scaled agile, within a lot of these platforms. A lot of these are moving to cloud. They've brought in the capabilities on bots, on analytics, and then AI in the PPM world. So again, I've just given you an example of Aptage being acquired by PlanView, but there are many others and many new players, specifically in the AI PPM aspect, and maybe we will look at some of that just a little bit later. Again, just for a very, very quick view, if you look at the 2021 not the PPM magic quadrant, but the strategic portfolio magic quadrant and the agile planning magic quadrant. This is kind of the shift that's now being seen, and therefore you will see some players in one of the graph, which is the agile tool one, and some of the ones are more into the strategic portfolio management area. So again, what may look superficially is that there is not so much change. Underlying, there is a lot of change that's happened, and products and have got new features, new capabilities, and they've got it integrated. Again, and we don't, we kind of can't stop there, right? It's not just we talked about product, we talked about project mix, we talked about the methodologies, we talked about the tools. It doesn't stop there. We talked about the portfolio selection mechanism. How you calculate your ROI. We touched upon how projects are funded, but the kind of resource management we do, what is the kind of definition that we have for resources and human resources. And if we take even bots into consideration, then the kind of resourcing allocation is obviously far more complex. So inherently, we are, the portfolio structures and the portfolio mechanisms and the parameters that influence are making it more and more and more complex, as we seem to be moving into a more and more complex world. So maybe it's not exactly in the same proportion, but it seems to be moving in that direction. Now that I've kind of set up that background, we talk about technology. Really, is it a disruptor or an enabler, and what is it doing in the project management world, right? So I think if you look at the picture on the left side here, this is from one of the PMI studies. I think it was done in 2018, which studied which were the key technologies that were going to disrupt project management. And clearly the number 1, 2, 3 are cloud, IoT, and AI. And we'll go into a little bit of depth into each of these. And again, I have some videos that are available and for you to look. You may have already looked at some. I wouldn't be able to play it during this presentation, but do feel free to look at that, and very happy to have a conversation. If we start with the AI, if that's where I would like to start. For example, Gartner came out, I think it was in 2019, and said 80% of today's project management tasks will be eliminated by 2030 due to artificial intelligence. And then, and I was referring to the Pulse of the Profession in-depth report around the disruptors of technology for competitive advantage. So again, that's clearly cloud, IoT, and AI. But yeah, it's a question that I think all of us have a lot of opinion about. It's something we have a lot of emotion also about, and I think the answer is probably simpler than that. I think I don't want to spoil the surprise, but I saw in one of the groups as part of the discussion during the conference, there was one on AI and its impact, and I think it was Joe Push who said, and I think he was speaking earlier today, that the in a lot of organizations we still are nowhere near making AI or initiating AI, leave alone mainstreaming it. So I think these statements are not necessarily that near in the future. They may be more mid to long term in terms of their impact. Just giving given the adoption in a lot of the non-technology areas, and of course the fact that the cost barrier around all of this for a lot of organizations is still significant. So yeah, and I why I say that is, I mean, maybe I think sometime in April I did a presentation at PMI Singapore on a closely related topic, and really at the end of it, the question got asked as to how many of the audience, which were obviously made of project managers, program portfolio managers, and how many of them were really interacting with AI in their current role, and we didn't have even one. So again, maybe because Singapore has more engineering, construction, those kind of areas, those kind of domains more, and maybe maybe IoT is more prevalent than, let's say, AI, for example. But we don't really need to get perturbed straight up, right now. Moving on. The first thing I think we'll start is with IoT, and and many of you would have looked at it. I just thought it will be good for the audience to understand how the maturity of a new technology is seen. How does it evolve? And Gartner, which is obviously consulting and advisory firm in the technology space, has something called as a hype cycle. It's quite significantly followed, and primarily it talks about any technology. It starts at a level of immaturity, and it goes through a hype cycle here, and then the first set of products come out. It is quite pricey. It needs a lot of changes, and then slowly it sees potential. There's adoption, with the users, and in this is called the trough of disillusionment, where many technologies and vendors die through this before the technology actually becomes mainstream. So when I'm going to talk about IoT, AI and cloud, I will touch upon this because it gives us a sense of what exactly that technology means. It's not just one thing, as you will say. It's a gamut of multiple things. So just looking at the hype cycle from just to give you reference, I have the hype cycle from 2019, but I also have the 2021. So just maybe we'll make a very quick comparison. So as I told you, it starts with the innovation trigger. There's peak of inflated expectation, trough of disillusionment. Sorry, I'm probably blocking this. Sorry. Trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then the plateau of productivity. That's what it goes through. So if you actually look at IoT, again, very sorry about this, but yeah, if you go through IoT, the ones on white clearly are just 2 years away from mainstream. So indoor location for assets. So these are like beacons that you have, say, in airports or in your offices. Technology like that is quite getting mainstream, and it was in 2019. In fact, if you look at 2021, I think it's already mainstream, and outside it's no longer on the hype cycle. But if you take something like the IoT edge AI kind of thing, which is which talks about maybe with your mobile devices and your mobile towers, what intelligence can you build at the last mile, where you're getting the signal from. So can there be more services apart from just the signal? Just a simple example of what that is. And can more services be provided just from that last mile connectivity that you have through to the mobile tower? Today, that's largely historically been a dumb tower. Or if you look at autonomous vehicles, for example, which is and Elon Musk and others would probably and Waymo and others would probably disagree with this, but with a lot of challenges, at least in 2019 was more than 10 years away. Now, if you look at the same curve roughly, you will see that, for example, the autonomous vehicles has really moved uh, uh, a bit from still in the trough of disillusionment, but it's pretty close to getting to the slope of enlightenment and on to plateau of productivity. So pretty much this may not happen in 8 years, but may possibly be much closer now. So and if you look at, say, edge AI, which was maybe 2 years back, 5 to 10 years away, is now 2 to 5 years away. So there's a acceleration in these technologies, which we kind of need to be aware of. Now, if I talk about IoT, I mean, there are varied kinds of IoTs, and where it's consumer, which you may be very well aware of. It's our Alexas of the world, which started with just us having entertainment through voice assistants, but does now a lot more. I mean, you can get into um, booking tickets, buying and purchasing from online through the voice devices, and of course, clearly there are commercial infrastructure, military applications of the same. In fact, one of the study that I heard was in one of the Scandinavian countries, where there was a study done to test a small chip was put in under the skin, in the wrist, and it could work as a payment verification mechanism. So rather than using your watch or your phone, you could use that chip to do that. So that kind of devices and that kind of tests are also something that are happening. So how is it impacting project management? So if we look at it, and there is there are varied viewpoints here, but we could converge, I think, to some of these. Clearly, in construction and engineering areas, it really helps proactively monitor. It helps, therefore helps also allows you to do proactively manpower allocation, which helps reduce costs. It helps your ability to do inventory and ordering much better. And you have a lot of data, especially with AI working with IoT. You have a lot of data that can help in predictive analytics. So this is clearly, these are definitely the areas. The other area clearly is, from an ethical legal implication, is also for employee safety. I think clearly that's something that's a major impact, especially in construction and engineering infrastructure projects. So as we were discussing earlier, I mean, again, repeating what Gartner said earlier, that probably majority of project management will get eliminated by 2030 thanks to AI, and or at least in the way we define project management today, right? So just before we go and see what kind of impact AI is having or is already having, very brief, quick view on what are the what AI is. So to simplify it, we think of it in four categories. We can think of it in four categories. There's machine learning, which an example for that for us is Netflix. We watch movies, we watch watch it for entertainment, and then what it does is it looks at patterns in the way we are doing that, and it then refers that to someone else, or refers someone else, or recommends that. Sorry, it works through a recommendation mechanism, and that's how it engages us, and it keeps learning and is able to do better predictions. Either can tell that a similar movie that I watched was watched by another person, or what were the other movies that person watched. So that kind of thing. There's natural language processing, which is like this. The simpler examples are Siri and Alexa. Obviously, it's able to interpret human speech and is able to do actions based on that. and of course continuous. So then there is learning, which could be an example where we talk about Waymo, which is the driverless car, and is where you really need the um, the artificial intelligence to be able to learn uh, far more deeply, and there are complex mechanisms, and obviously the use cases are far more critical, because we probably cannot we cannot afford um, pretty much any error. Then there's visual recognition, which is, could be Google Lens. You wear the lens, you look at an object, and then based on recognizing that object, various kinds of information and tasks could be completed. So those are broadly the four category. Again, interestingly, I'm sorry for the for the size of the pictures on this, but again, clearly we must understand, as we were talking about IoT, that AI is not just one technology. There are multiple sets of technologies uh, that are there, and again, the progression, if I may show you, is if I take Edge AI, which was somewhere here on the hype cycle, is now here. So we are seeing clear acceleration on some of these. And here, if you look, we again see the AI autonomous vehicles. Obviously, that has an AI element in it. And things like chatbots are already quite mainstream, and they should be pretty much in the next 2 years be part of the mainstream setup. Of course, there's a lot of learning in still remaining in those areas, but just picking simple examples to make that case. But if you look at it, there are no many new areas now: AI governance, human-centered AI, um, and um, and of course there's talk of artificial general intelligence, which is that the art the non-natural art or artificial entity is actually able to build capacity like general intelligence, on general intelligence like human beings. Again, so how AI will transform, and this is in reference to a study that PwC did, I think in the Middle East and in some parts of Europe, and primarily it looked at 5 areas that AI would transform project management. So those, I would say, are business insights, risk management, human capital optimization, action taking, and active assistance. So we'll dive into that. When I say business insights, it's about having being able to look at data, filter it, and be able to derive insights out of it. Build optimized schedules which are live, real time, and is able to react to the varied set of scenarios that we today face, and the unpredictability of the scenarios. And of course, virtual assistants, for example, will be able to research new trends and bring expertise and expert information. And last but not the least, you would possibly have in portfolios in far better data, and we were talking about it earlier, and be able to prioritize projects not just based on some of the selection criteria that we put in, but also bring in artificial intelligence by bringing a fuzzy logic into it. And of course, all of this requires evangelizing within organizations, understanding the models. The models need to learn and need to get contextualized. The other and just an example, and I have a video here, but we maybe wouldn't be able to go through that right now. Is also just as an example, one of the companies that does this is the tool Forecast, which the company Forecast, which has a product called Auto Schedule, and this pretty much in real time, based on the inputs that you provide, is able to reschedule and allocate resources based on that. And again, it can do multiple scenarios, things like that. Another example, again, not specifically evangelizing, just taking an example to share, is a product from Engine, which again is able to do multiple horizon planning, can do replanning instantly, can do risk management, scenario based planning. So you could optimize your plan to deliver the highest priority projects, or you could do it optimized based on the resource allocation, or you could optimize it based on the scarcity of resources, or you could create your own algorithm and do this. And this is something that's there. And of course, this does multiple horizon plannings as well. And then there's of course, I'm sure many of you have heard of PMO. Again, there are multiple other products, not multiple, but definitely a few others that are there. And there are various chatbots that are beginning to integrate this as well. So all the project managers on the field that need to do their reporting, do it remotely, and just do that through the chat. It gets integrated to your enterprise PPM or project management tool, and pretty much your project charters, your reporting, your KPIs, your risk management, and or at least risk identification and reporting, and task management can be managed. So that's also an area where this is evolving significantly. And then of course there's human resource optimization, where I mean, the example I would give is clearly, is AI operations. Is today, if you go to any retail, online retail website, and look to order a product, often historically we had to face multiple set of stakeholders in that organization. If for example, there was a failure in the infrastructure, and we were making a payment and it got stuck in between, so we would be talking to customer support. Sometimes it would be with the IT team. Sometimes due to escalation, it goes up the chain. But proactively, if the infrastructure is able to detect in a way that there would be a failure in the next 1 hour, and that is informed to the customer support, then the customer support then guides you when you get into do the transaction to either take it offline, do it later, or come to a conclusion. And that's kind of how that's getting done. So this is kind of what I was talking about. So um, the infrastructure, the application layer, and the business transactions. And sometimes as a customer, you're talking to everyone, and it's been a pain. But one of the ways that AI is helping is switching this. And then of course there's cloud, and we cannot keep that outside at all. In fact, it's always, probably in my view, an amalgamation of these technologies and their interplay that is bringing us the value more than anything else. Again, this is an older hype cycle, but possibly I would say cloud is far more evolved by now. But again, if you look at it, when we talk about cloud, it's not a single technology. You're talking about infrastructure as a service, software as a service, platform as a service. You're again talking about edge computing, which we refer to. So site reliability. So it's again a gamut of technologies that are evolving and moving through these hype cycles. So some of the areas like infrastructure as a service, software as a service are becoming very close to being mainstream, and some are almost there. So and there are others that are obviously moving. Cloud migration, private cloud computing, all of those are areas that seem to be evolving. But the thing to keep in mind is that the complexity comes from the fact that it's not just one technology or one aspect of technology. Of course, this is something all of you are anyway aware of, and I wouldn't like to repeat it. But primarily, 4 types of cloud: public that stays inside, public that stays outside, obviously led by the big cloud providers. Hybrid, private is of course within organizations due to various requirements, they may be regulatory or otherwise. Hybrid is a combination, and of course the community clouds, where organizations or may come together. SMEs may come together to have a multi-tenant kind of mechanism. Again, from the impact of cloud on project management, um, it's quite interesting. Obviously, there's a clear when we talk about the infrastructure in IT, for example, there is clearly a lower IT operational costs. You are able to drive projects much faster. Supposedly, there's a lot of it fosters a lot of innovation because you're able to quickly do changes, put it on production, check it, come back, all of that. Some challenges I think largely known already are more around security and make and having clarity on what you're putting out. So it's the reversal of the traditional business, that is buy before you try. So you are buying it and then you're kind of experimenting with it. So it's a shift in that sense, but obviously it brings a lot of advantages as well. So um, I think the point, and I'm pretty much done with the slides, but the point that I would want to conclude with is that I see the amalgamation of these technologies bringing a lot of value, and clearly in the short term, I don't see it. I mean, overall, I see it as an enabler, and maybe in the long term, there's a possibility for it to disrupt. But just referring to the PwC study that I mentioned earlier, the the even in that study, a question was asked whether an AI would completely replace the role of project managers. And I'm not saying that necessarily that study is the whole and soul on this subject, but just to keep it in mind that at no point that study result in saying that a project manager's role will completely be taken. So it's only that the role will evolve in another direction. It will evolve in the directions of um, you know with where the project manager will have to build skills on maybe areas like privacy, security, um, and also certain softer skills as well, not necessarily focus on maybe more mundane activities like planning, replanning, which AI could, or all the combination of all these technologies could help. So ultimately, the this is going to be an enabler, and we in the project program, portfolio management world need to embrace it to ensure that it enables us. And with that, end the session. Thank you very much. Elena, over to you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, there is no doubt that artificial intelligence will be part of our life and with sure will take some project management tasks. But my question is, what will happen with the most important project management task, communication, in context of artificial intelligence?
Correct. I mean, I think you're right. Communication. That's what all of us when we started our let's say our careers in project management heard. So I think you're right. I mean, there are certain aspects of communication which are repetitive, and maybe AI could look at taking those. But I think there are human elements that will still remain very sacrosanct, and I don't think that they are going to get replaced. And if we looked at the if we looked at the I'm just going to refer to this quickly, but if we looked at the chart which the Gartner cycle that talked about AI, and we looked at the artificial general intelligence, that's still some distance away. So to answer your question kind of directly, I think it'll be something that we will continue to do.
Okay. One question from the audience. Is RPA the only way ahead and could PMO become obsolete because of it?
Sorry, Elena, you have to repeat that. I
Yes.
missed the first.
Is RPA the only way ahead, and could PMO become obsolete because of it?
Okay, it's so I think RPA is accelerating quite significantly. And again, I don't think PMOs will become obsolete. PMOs will change their function and change their nature. So I think one of the sessions was talking about PMOs becoming more strategy offices, more innovation offices. So I think the nature will change. In fact, I feel with all of what we spoke, I spoke in this session and others as well earlier in the day. The organization structures and the projects in the organizations are not getting less complicated complex. They are getting more and more complex. So I don't think the PMOs will get obsolete. But RPA and automation will take away some of the repetitive activities, and it'll allow the PMOs to evolve what they're doing and not get bogged down with just the operational activity, which is essential to the functioning of the PMO. But they'll probably not be restricted to that.
Okay, last question from the studio. Because today we are trying to predict the future, I would like to ask you regarding the PPM tools. What is your prediction? How they will develop in the next 5 years?
Okay. First of all, I have to say this: I'm not trying to predict the future at all. And I think after the pandemic, I think no one wants to predict the future. Um, I um, it's a very good question. I don't know if I have a very good answer for it. I think these elements that we are seeing in terms of um, agile features coming into the PPM tools and hybrid models being addressed. Um, I would say that the tool that is most flexible in doing this is going to be ahead. I mean, largely in this overall, we've not seen too much change. In terms of if you look at the Magic Quadrant, or if you want to refer to that, but even in your own experiences and our own experiences. So I would I'm I don't think there'll be a very significant shift in the next 5 years, but I think uh, tools that will bring the most agility are the ones that are going to stay ahead. And I don't mean that from a methodology perspective. I'm talking more from a business agility perspective. So I think tools that will be able to do that will lead,
Great.
but definitely not predicting the future.
Okay. Yeah, it was a little bit a joke, but thank you very much for the answer and for this contribution to our session and to our first day of the conference. Thank you, behalf of PMI Bulgaria chapter, that you agreed to be a speaker. Thank you and have a nice evening or maybe night.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you to the team at PMI Bulgaria. It was a pleasure to do this, and looking forward to tomorrow's sessions. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.